This is a program from the Independent Voters of Illinois Independent Precinct Organization, IVI-IPO. We're so glad that you could join us, and we're glad that our three panelists could join us as well tonight. So some quick introductions. We'll start with Josh Bajoni. Josh is a partner with a law firm here in Chicago, where he's practiced civil litigation since 2009. He has a long history of volunteer work concerning civics education and environmental issues. Josh became a trained climate reality project leader in 2013 and is presently serving as the Chicago chapter's campaigns committee co-chair. He was recently elected to the board of the Chicago Bar Association's Media and Civic Education, Inc., and is in his 9th year as a volunteer in the Lawyers in the Classroom program, a fantastic program. Thank you so much for doing that. Our second panelist tonight is Kimberly Neely Dubuclet, who was elected to the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago, the MWRD, Board of Commissioners in November 2018. Prior to joining the board, Commissioner Dubuclet served as the Legislative and Community Affairs Director for the Chicago Park District and previously served as a representative in the Illinois General Assembly. While serving, she was recognized by and actually received an award from the Illinois Environmental Council for consistently voting with the Environmental Caucus. As a commissioner, she's working to increase awareness of environmental justice issues throughout Cook County and to increase open green space for communities while providing additional green infrastructure opportunities for water conservation. Commissioner Dubuclet strives to fulfill the mission of the MWRD, which is to protect the quality of our water supply, improve the quality of water in our waterways, and to protect businesses and residences from flood damage across Cook County. Commissioner Dubuclet is a South Side native and a lifelong Chicagoan. She earned a BA from the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana, or Urbana-Champaign, sorry, and an MBA from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business.
No, thank you.
And our third panelist tonight is David Robinson, the Director of External Affairs for Manufacturing Renaissance. And Mr. Robinson graduated from Morehouse College and began his varied professional life as a reporter and actually still continues on occasional contributor to several publications. He joined the Harold Washington administration's economic development policy and program team as a city planner and later as an assistant commissioner, where he developed a passion for innovative, socially inclusive economic development program design and implementation. He actually developed cutting-edge programs and policy focusing on municipal recycling and solid waste management, and is considered an early pioneer in that industry. Mr. Robinson was recruited to join the team at Manufacturing Renaissance, where he's recognized the unequaled strength manufacturing presents for rebuilding struggling communities while also strengthening regional economies. In his role as External Affairs Director, Mr. Robinson works to build political and community advocacy and policies around linking public education and community wealth building to the modern manufacturing industry. His many awards and citations include the Who's Who Among African American Journalists, the Philadelphia Youth Services Award, the Pennsylvania Governor's Excellence Award, the Living Legends Passing the Torch Community Service Award. He was cited as one of the Chicago Defender's Men of Excellence, and most recently in 2018, Congressman Danny Davis named him one of Chicago's outstanding education-related program administrators, which is a very long way of saying I feel wholly inadequate of asking him questions, but we're going to do that anyway.
Yeah, who wrote that? That sounded pretty good.
You're welcome. No, I mean, it's all true. That's the beauty of it. So, you know, we have three experts in this field. I'd actually like to start with Mr. Bajoni real quick. We mentioned that you're actually on the board of the Climate Reality Project. For those who haven't heard, what is that? What do they do?
Sure, and thanks for having me participate on this, Jimmy. I appreciate it. The Climate Reality Project has been around since 2006. It started off really, started by former Vice President Al Gore, and it was intended to train people into having a better understanding of climate change issues, and really both kind of from a practical standpoint, from a scientific standpoint, and to become kind of leaders in their communities to kind of educate folks on these issues and to rally them behind change. It has evolved over the years as it's become less of an issue, finally, thankfully, of educating people that climate change is actually real and happening, to more now chapters have formed, and Chicago has one of the largest chapters as of several years ago it formed, and to really working at the local level to kind of promote policy and legislation both from the municipal, state, and federal levels. And that's really the focus, particularly this year.
Okay. Now we also mentioned with Mr. Robinson, we mentioned manufacturing renaissance. I'm assuming several people have not heard of that. So can you give us a little detail? What is manufacturing renaissance?
Sure, I'd be happy to. First, thank you for inviting me to the panel. I feel like I'm the least qualified to talk about environmental stuff here, but I'm grateful to be on the panel with my distinguished other panelists. And the manufacturing renaissance essentially began with the question, is manufacturing dead? Our founder, Dan Swinney, was working on the West Side in a manufacturing plant. And the plant began to no longer invest in repairing machinery, taking care of the various things to keep it running, and eventually the doors were shut. And many of us remember throughout the Chicago area, where it was heavily industrialized, a lot of those companies closed. And he asked the question, is manufacturing really dead? And turns out that with the emergence of the information age and the ability to do major financial transactions over the internet, along with low-cost labor going offshore, a number of companies chose to go for short-term profit rather than continue the social contract they had with these communities. And then, so as a result, we lost over 3,000 companies in 12 years in Chicago area, 250,000 jobs. It's our belief in the organization that that's really the beginning of the social cause of the social issues that we're suffering and trying to fix today with respect to what's happening in our communities. So manufacturing renaissance, our entire approach is essentially to create thought leadership around solving issues within community development through manufacturing. And we have three things that we concentrate on, and that's the broad-based policy discussions. We have an organization called Chicagoland Manufacturing Renaissance Council. And at the council, it's a broad-based table where labor, education, business, environmentalists, community activists, and elected officials and others sit around the table to discuss policy in this space. We decided that when, even though low-skilled labor moved offshore, what was left, 98% of the industry is still these small manufacturing companies that are hidden in plain sight all around us. You probably pass by, Robinson ball bearings, little companies along the side of the road and really don't notice them. That's the real strength and the backbone of the manufacturing industry. And those guys didn't have the wherewithal to ship off overseas. They stayed in these communities. Now, what happened, of course, was the vocational education system was shut down when major manufacturing left cities as well. So the training pipeline disappeared. And we have developed a training apparatus that identifies and brings young people into manufacturing through rigorous training, certification, and we get them jobs and we help them keep the jobs. And the manufacturing companies, are really desperate for this kind of talent so that they can continue to compete. And then the third thing that we are exploring is ownership succession, building wealth around ownership succession. And 98% of the owners of these smaller companies are white males over 55 years old. They're retiring in the next 10 to 12 years. They're going to be selling their companies. We did a study in '89 indicating that 43% of them had no succession plan. Did another study in 2018 indicating that around 63% had no succession plan. We're putting together teams and identifying these companies when they're ready to sell. We're putting teams of Black, brown, women, and workers together to acquire those companies, to build wealth, retain the jobs, and keep those companies in communities because many of them are third generation. And what happens is the larger companies, if they have an opportunity to acquire, they will take the patents, best equipment that they can get out of the shop, and they'll shut it down. And that's 150, 200, 800 jobs suddenly gone. So our process through our paradigm shift is through manufacturing to build economy, build community, and build wealth, Black and brown, and communities that suffered the most after disinvestment.
Now, in terms of, you mentioned training folks in manufacturing jobs and getting them through vocational training and getting them in getting succession plans set together for businesses that are currently operating. Is there a specific environmental approach to it, or is it more economic based?
It's a good question. It's our belief that that there must be a complete, inclusive, all hands on deck approach to environmental stewardship. And we also believe that legislation alone, activism alone, it will not solve the environmental crisis that we're experiencing. Much of the change and the benefits that will accrue for the environment are going to happen with innovation. You look at the Elon Musk and the whole electric car kind of movement. That was really developed as a result to answer the question about combustion engines and carbon emissions. How do we make a better car? So innovation, manufacturing really will, in our opinion, will begin to drive sensible, smart environmental policy. And it's going to take more than legislation. It'll take investment at the government level. It'll take smart regulation. To take communities demanding these products and demanding that this continue to both support their lifestyles, but also support a healthy environment and a healthy economy. We think we can do both and.
Now, I want to talk. You mentioned, legislation isn't enough. Just some initiatives aren't enough. I want to actually talk about that with Commissioner Dubuclet. As someone who's been a legislator and is now currently on the Water Reclamation Board, can you discuss kind of what the MWRD's purview is in terms of environmental protections, not just water reclamation, but how you try to achieve that policy goal of protecting businesses and residences and flood damage, improving the quality of water? How is that done through the organization, through the agency?
Again, thank you for having me. I'm going to just start by giving a brief introduction as to what the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District does, because it's a little, I shouldn't say little, it's an unknown agency that affects our daily lives. And I say it's the most important agency that no one knows about. So what we do, the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, is we take wastewater, storm wastewater, so anything that goes down your drain, anything that goes down your toilet, the water, the used water from your dishwasher and your washing machine, the storm water that goes down your drain and the streets, the gutters. We take all that wastewater, we take it to one of our 7 reclamation plants located around the county, and we reclaim it and we clean it and make sure that that wastewater does not make its way back into our freshwater supply, which happens to be Lake Michigan. And so we consider ourselves an environmental agency because we are protecting our precious resource. And most people don't realize that Lake Michigan, which is where our freshwater supply comes from, actually supply, not Lake Michigan, I should say the Great Lakes, supply 70% of the freshwater supply in the United States. So 70% of our freshwater comes from the Great Lakes that we're sitting on right now. So it's very important that we protect that resource and make sure that it stays free of contaminants, free of pollutants, free of invasive species, anything that might make it difficult for us to use it as our freshwater supply. Second thing we do is we help to mitigate flooding. So whenever we have these huge storms because of climate change that are happening more frequently and more intensely, we have huge reservoirs that fill with the rainwater. So, and it captures the rainwater so that it does not end up into our homes and into our basements. And I actually grew up in a home that flooded nearly every time it rained on the far south side. And we constantly had to shovel out sludge, put our washer and dryer up on pallets, get rid of items that were ruined because of the waste that came into our basement. So this is something that I've personally dealt with pretty much since I was a kid, all of my life. So flooding, wastewater reclamation, and helping to protect the environment. That's our goal, and that's what we do to try, that's the part that we do to try and keep the environment clean. As I stated at the beginning, we're one of the most important agencies no one knows about because everyone uses the bathroom every time you flush the toilet, that waste, or every time you run your faucet or run your washing machine, that wastewater comes to us. We make sure it doesn't make its way into our fresh water.
So I have two questions then based on that. So uh, um, we have this water that's been reclaimed, taken out the pollutants, taken out the detergents, taken out once that water is cleaned, what's done with it? Is it put back into the system? Is it put back into the lakes? Is it put into a river? What happens to the now reclaimed water?
So it goes into the river and it goes down to the Gulf of Mexico, but it is clean water as measured by the EPA. And some people say it's cleaner than some municipalities' water supply. One of the things that the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District engineers did back in at the beginning of turn of the century is that they reversed the flow of the river from going into Lake Michigan, and instead now it flows away from Lake Michigan. And the reason for that, when this agency was first created as a sanitary district, somebody would flush their toilet or somebody would use a bucket or however they disposed of their waste back then, and it would flow directly into the river, and then the river water would flow directly into Lake Michigan. So the engineers at the time decided one way to try and keep the lake clean, or the Great Lakes clean, was to reverse the flow of the river to prevent that wastewater and sludge and stormwater from flowing directly into Lake Michigan. And I'm sure Josh knows a lot more about that than I do.
I appreciate your confidence.
Well, I based on that, I'll go ahead and ask a quick follow-up, and then we have just so everyone knows in the audience, if you are watching this on Zoom, you can feel free to put questions down in the chat box. We have someone monitoring it. We'll go ahead and pull those out and put them to our panelists in just a few minutes. Well, I want to talk about real quickly, kind of pulling in what Mr. Robinson said and what you've said is policy.
Mhm.
What kind of, I won't say legislative action, but what kind of actions and authority does the MWRD have to kind of implement on its own?
So we are not a legislative body. We are a policy-making body. And when we want legislation passed, we go to Springfield. However, we have implemented a policy, a water management ordinance that helps when developers are building, they have to create enough space to collect the excess rain and stormwater on the property so that areas don't flood as much. So that's called the WMO. And that is a policy that we've created that some might view as legislation, although it's not officially legislation.
Okay. Now, Josh, we'll turn back to you real quickly in terms of legislation that is moving forward at the state level or even at the federal level. What kind of things are happening right now, policy-wise, that kind of deal with what the MWRD is asking about, and that labor such as those from Manufacturing Renaissance need in part of their operations?
It's a great question, and one that I definitely want to emphasize because of its timeliness right now. There are a number of energy bills that are currently being discussed and negotiated at the state legislature here in Illinois. The one that the Climate Reality Project itself and me personally find to be the best and have been advocating for, along with many other groups such as the Illinois Environmental Council and the National Resources Defense Council, et cetera, is the Clean Energy Jobs Act, which is known in short as CEJA. It goes hand in hand with kind of what Mr. Robinson and the commissioner were talking about, but particularly there's been both at the national level with the Biden administration plans, which we can perhaps talk about a little bit later, but CEJA, I think more of a recognition that environmental policy and climate change policy in particular has been discussed in the past as somehow being adverse to economic development. And that simply isn't true. It is not borne out by the data. And anybody who doubted that now can look to see really what a lot of people want to call free market forces have done. So before I get to CJ, I can back out a little bit if you don't mind. So it's been reported in 2020, last year. Obviously, it was a bizarre year for all of us, for the whole world. But in 2020, the overall energy consumption around the world decreased by 5%. Yet renewable energy consumption increased by 7%. The markets for renewable energy, in particular solar, have just grown so rapidly, more rapidly than many of us even thought was feasible. And in many places around the world, at present, the cost of renewable energy, be it solar or wind primarily, is less expensive than fossil fuel produced energy. So what CEJA does in Illinois, and why it's so important, or at least the principles of CEJA, is I guess I'll tell everybody about it, and then I'm really going to advocate that everybody call their senator, their state representative, and Governor Pritzker's office. Because the end of this month is the do or die date. If CEJA or some energy legislation isn't passed, and the commissioner can speak to this better than I can, but then it's pretty much done, because that's the end of the legislative session. And so here, what CEJA is, for those who may not have heard of it or aren't familiar with it, it takes a comprehensive job approach to promoting jobs and equity throughout the state. It has a 100% renewable energy goal, not a goal, but a mandate by 2050, has a mandate to have a carbon-free power sector by 2030. It has mandates and incentives in there to increase access to different renewable sources, such as in electronic vehicles, or that Mr. Robinson was noting, and it does all this while at the same time focusing on two things that have been, in two communities that have been overlooked in the past. One are communities of color, often so-called fence line communities that have often had to bear the burden disproportionately of pollution. Mayor Lightfoot has put a pause on that permit after the new EPA administrator on Friday wrote a letter saying that he had some serious concerns about the General Iron facility going in on the southwest side, which is a place where there's been a lot of a history of environmental racism and also pollution. But I'm getting off topic. Back to CEJA, the focus is to have these, for example, CEJA creates these clean workforce hubs, right? That's part of the bill. And it would be a network of organizations that provide direct and sustained support to these often overlooked and underserved communities to create these jobs. The other community that's taken into account are these fossil fuel communities, because places where there are coal plants and things like that, from an environmental standpoint, it would be great to snap our fingers and have them shut down. But from an economic standpoint, obviously for people whose livelihoods are tied to that, that would be devastating. So CEJA provides also mechanisms to support folks, to train them, to retrain them into renewable energy and the production of manufacturing jobs, dealing with solar panels, wind turbines, charging stations here in the state of Illinois. Governor Pritzker, I think, just announced the other day another, I think it's Lion Transportation, I may be getting the name wrong.
Lion Electric, yeah.
Lion Electric to build, and Rivian is here building, electric trucks. So there's a lot of opportunity here. And CEJA would also place us, if we're so fortunate to have at the federal level this jobs and infrastructure plan by the Biden administration that is really kind of being drafted in Congress right now. That plan has climate initiatives and goals interwoven throughout the entire thing. They've taken probably a politically smarter approach, I would say, than in the past. Instead of presenting a climate bill, which for various reasons, merited or unmerited, I would argue the latter, has become so politically toxic. They've approached it in the jobs and infrastructure plan. So CEJA would set Illinois up to be to benefit at the federal level if such legislation passed, that we would have kind of the mechanisms and the policies in place to really capitalize on funneling money, federal money, to the state of Illinois for renewable energy and renewable manufacturing. And we'd be at one of the few states at the forefront of that. So I really would urge folks to go and you can look up, if you don't know who your state representatives are, you can go to the Illinois Board of Elections and put in your address, and it will tell you everybody at both from your alderman all the way up to the President of the United States, who your representatives are and how to contact them. And I would really urge everybody to reach out as often as possible from now through the end of the month to encourage their state representatives and senators to pass the Clean Energy Jobs Act.
Thank you for that. Now, Mr. Robinson, I want to talk about what was just mentioned here is that a large part of it, we have CEJA, the Clean Energy Jobs Act. Just a few days ago, I think on May 7th, it was announced that Lion Electric is bringing its electric bus and truck manufacturing plant to Joliet. When you talk about vocational work, when you talk about manufacturing work, are these the kinds of jobs that Manufacturing Renaissance also tries to train folks for, so that they could be the direct beneficiaries of CEJA or federal action?
So our specific strength is in machining skills training, metalwork primarily. So while we don't specifically train for those areas, what we've learned from our manufacturing partners, and we work with approximately 150 of them in and around our programs, what we've learned is that if the people that we train have the proper certifications at the front end of the training curve, if they can measure, if they can have 9th grade math competency, if they can read a blueprint, if they can do those things, and in some cases even operate a CNC machine, computer numerically code machine, that's the basis for much of the manufacturing industry in any category. So what that does is it allows them some flexibility in where they work. And what we found that as long as they're really, that we've done our job and really trained them and given them the skill set and the understanding of how manufacturing works, they have opportunities in many categories. So I just want to really say how excited we are right now in this moment. Just as Josh was mentioning, there seems to be a reawakening of the value of innovation, R&D, driving the manufacturing processes in the environmental and climate change industry. For example, it takes approximately 8,000 components to make a wind turbine. And you know, that's manufactured innovation. That is jobs. And we really are promoting the development of and building wealth in communities that were the most affected and continue to be the most affected by environmental racism and environmental degradation. So it seems to us that both economically and environmentally, it makes sense to connect the people of color who suffer the most to the opportunities that perhaps will rebuild both communities, but also help improve our environmental systems throughout the country. And so we're really encouraged by this because we think the two go hand in hand. And the more people that are qualified to get these particular emerging environmental and green jobs, the better it is for these economies, which is the better for our communities. I haven't worked in African-American, Black and brown communities and trying to, sell recycling in the 80s. That was a difficult sell because there were so many other challenges that people were dealing with, that figuring out how to separate your, number 1, 2, 3 plastic bottles was not a priority. But if we can connect effective job creation, effective industrial and strategic industrial policy, and what we call inclusion in Industry 4.0, which is based on best practices in Europe and UN development, sustainability language, by using the best approach and having everyone at the table, all the stakeholders at the table, and connecting all of these dots, we feel like we can build a better Chicago, better country, a better global environment. So to answer your question, yes, we big time support it, and we want our young people to actually have opportunities in those kind of places.
Okay. Now, we did discuss briefly electric vehicles and electric buses, trucks, things like that. Those oftentimes run on lithium batteries, at least currently they do. I want to discuss with the commissioner what your understanding is of the extraction and use and possible disposal of lithium batteries, and whether or not that kind of presents a difficulty or a challenge for pro-environmentalism and pro-environmental groups. Um, how damaging is it to use
So-
lithium?
So absolutely lithium, and I'm going to also put prescription drugs in that same category, things that we can't process out of our wastewater. And so what we try and do, or what we do is we encourage constituents, residents to return their prescription drugs to various locations around the county, whether it's the county sheriff's office, whether it's your local pharmacy, or whether it's a drug take back program that we sponsor with different elected officials and community organizations. And generally at our drug take back recycling days, we also offer electronic recycling so that people can bring back their batteries, their computers, their old printers, whatever old electronics, cell phones, to your point, that are using these lithium batteries. Because if someone throws their lithium battery operated device into a trash can, it's going to go into one of our landfills and possibly make its way into the groundwater. So we're trying to prevent that from happening by having people recycle these devices at these various events. And a lot of that has to do with educating the public. Because when I was growing up, I was told, and my parents were told, and my grandparents were told to flush your prescription medicines down the toilet. And so that's what they did. And so it's a whole education process that we have to re-educate the public not to do that. And also just not to throw away everything that needs to be disposed of, because again, it ends up in our landfills and eventually makes its way into our groundwater. And I believe that's a huge role in what MWRD does, the commissioners and the staff, is to be an education resource for communities so that they understand, the things that they do on a daily basis, how they can affect the environment.
Is there any, I don't want to say cooperation, but collaboration, I suppose, between the MWRD and municipalities to develop systems where rather than having to take, lithium batteries and the old devices, taking them to certain sites or on certain days or whatever, to simply put it into your recycling, and then it will all get sorted and they'll pull out those lithium things. Is that a possibility? Has there been any work on that?
I can't say there's been work on putting electronic devices into the recycling bin. That's the first I've heard of that. That doesn't seem, just on first thought, like it would be a great idea. Josh, maybe you can chime in on that, because our recycling program is already not great. So it doesn't seem like adding electronics to it would help our situation. Josh, do you have any insights on?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. I mean, first, before I get to the recycling really quickly, I do want to say, Jimmy, one of the things that the Commissioner noted earlier, and that the MWRD has really been promoting for a while now, is diversion of waste, including particularly from the water aspect, of not having, and I know there are initiatives there from permeable asphalt and concrete to also rain gardens, to all these things that may sound small initially, that actually have a huge impact on energy use, as well as diversion of the wastewater going into the stream. As for lithium and to your specific question, I would like to say that we're someplace close to where we could put lithium or something like that in the recycling. Chicago has a woefully awful rate. I think it's the worst of the large metropolitan areas on recycling. We're at about 8.8%. Recently, there was a change, and by comparison, what one would think on the opposite end of the spectrum, like a city like San Francisco, is often in the 80 to 90% rate. Okay, we're not even at 10%. There's lots of reasons for that, and that's probably a whole nother Zoom. Starting back with the whole blue bag program from Mayor Daley all the way up through now the blue bin. The key is there has been a recent change in negotiation. The city took initiative to get rid of waste management that was, I think studies have found, and anecdotally it was found that they were finding many of the blue bins to be contaminated, which means that waste management would get paid for disposing of it, first finding that it was contaminated and then paid a second time for disposing of it in the landfill. And none of it was recycled. So now it will be through the city government or primarily through another private vendor, Lakeshore Recycling. I may be getting the name wrong, that they are now instructed that as long as a bin is not contaminated more than 50%, that they are to take that recycling and bring it to a facility to be sorted and recycled. But the key for consumers in that point is to not contaminate it, and lithium batteries would certainly contaminate it. We just don't have the means to do that, to recycle that at this point in time. So we got to be careful about what a lot of people call wish cycle. They wish they could recycle it, so they put it in the blue bin and think it will be taken care of. That actually has the opposite effect. It may be good intentions, bad results. Lithium itself it's a complicated process. I won't get into it, but there's open mining. The United States right now, I think, produces about 14% of the world's lithium, though we have the capacity to produce much, much more, and probably will need to do that because of the EV boom that is starting to happen. But it is important, Jimmy, as you kind of point out, that we keep our eyes open to all things. I mean, good intentions can have bad results. Open mining sourcing of lithium often does poison groundwater aquifers and the land. It's often in areas that are otherwise protected for indigenous people, things like that. There are other methods that have been developed and are continuing to be developed of lithium extraction that is much more environmentally friendly. And equally cost effective, and through R&D measures like David was noting, those should continue to increase. I guess I analogize a lot of this stuff to back in, I remember in college, my roommate bought a multi-disc DVD player, and I think it was like $1,000, and we thought he was crazy. Right now, you can go to like Walgreens and buy a Blu-ray player for like $8. The technology gets better, it develops faster, it gets to scale, and you can buy those things a lot easier. And so with EV and lithium, I think we as consumers have to push to make sure we know where the source is from, and the technology is also being developed so that it's mined properly from the source end, and then on the back end to make sure that it can be properly recycled and reused.
And not in the recycling bin.
And not in the recycling bin,
yeah.
correct.
And with your pizza boxes and all that, yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
So quick, Jim, I'm sorry, I'm going to steal this just for a
Please.
moment. I can't help myself. Now, there was a lot of talk a few years back about fuel cell technology for providing energy, and you're talking about it for vehicles. Josh, do you have any idea what's happened with that work?
A little bit. I don't want to overrepresent my knowledge, which my wife tells me I like to do quite frequently, and I'm often wrong. But there's different kinds of fuel cells. I'm not as familiar with the hydrogen point. That's kind of far behind in development comparatively. In Europe, there's been a little bit more on dealing with that, but I know some environmental and just some practical issues of how to do that because it's so combustible. From compressed natural gas, that's something that a lot of environmental minded folks have really advocated not to be any kind of new wave. That was thought of as being kind of a bridge,
right.
Natural gas in general, but a bridge in terms of there's so many issues. There's so many methane leaks. There's so many issues with fracking and environmental issues. And usually, again, the communities that are most affected by that natural gas is just really, we already have the technology that we don't need to use it. And so we don't to have compressed natural gas for vehicles isn't good. And actually what happened last week, I don't know if they got much attention, but Governor Pritzker did reallocate about $90 million of the settlement that was obtained by the state of Illinois from the Volkswagen clean diesel lawsuit, where Volkswagen had kind of put these devices in place that essentially would trick regulators, because it would appear that their diesel burned cleaner than it was, and they were advertising it as kind of a green product. Well, it actually was much dirtier than it was. So there are many states sued VW. It was a multi-billion dollar settlement. Illinois got about $109 million. Governor Rauner had allocated it in a certain way, and really to in many ways allowed the state to repurchase dirty diesel with just newer diesel that was still dirty. Governor Pritzker has now kind of directed the government to use that not for diesel and not for low emission vehicles, including fuel cell vehicles such as natural gas, but in electric vehicles. And so there's about $90 million left that will go towards charging stations and electric vehicle manufacturing, electric school buses, things of that nature.
I have to say, part of our strategic plan is to reduce our carbon footprint as well. And I know the previous executive director wanted us to be energy neutral by I think it was 2035 or 2040. But we're actually going through a strategic planning process right now to really think about what our realistic goal is in terms of reducing our energy usage. Because one of our largest expenses is energy. Moving water, cleaning water, transportation of water.
Which is, of course, very weighty, and so takes a lot of energy to move.
Yes.
So I did have
Jim,
a
do
quick...
you mind if I comment on one element of something else that was raised before?
Sure.
There was another big issue, because I know, as the name would suggest of our group, climate change is the big focus, but there are obviously other environmental issues. And Illinois shamefully has 1/8 of all lead service pipes in the entire country. 1/8.
And mostly in Black and brown communities.
Mostly in Black and brown.
Absolutely, 94% in Black and brown communities of that 1/8. So, there isn't a clearer example of environmental racism in my mind than that, as the Flint crisis in Michigan pointed out. So there also is at the state level, there is a lead service line replacement and notification act that's been introduced in both the House and the Senate in Illinois. It is, that's something the lead, it is hard to have Chicago or Illinois be a world-class state, or in a world-class city in a world-class state, if we have our residents drinking poison, because there is no safe level of lead.
Right.
The EPA does have a level that it identifies, but all scientists say that there's no safe level of lead to consume. And right now there are more than 300,000 kids just in the state of Illinois alone, again, primarily Black and brown, who are exposed to washing their face, brushing their teeth, and drinking and eating this lead contaminated water. And it's really
so Josh, you've actually managed to anticipate an entire line of questioning I was just about to ask. So
sorry about that.
No. I mean, it's a good segue, and people have been asking about that down in the comments. We're actually going to have our program vice chair, Rebecca Janowitz, join us as well, because I know that she's done a lot of work on this. But I also do want to know, in terms of having lead pipes throughout Chicago, does the MWRD have a role in trying to get lead out of our drinking water?
So the lead is already in the water when it comes out the faucet. And when it goes down the drain, when we reclaim it, it's already in the water. I don't think that our reclamation process cleans lead out of the water. I think that has to be stopped before it enters the home. Josh, would you?
Commissioner, I completely agree with you. That's a Department of Water issue, not a MWRD issue.
Right, that's a City of Chicago issue. Yeah. Water entering the home.
So each municipality would be responsible for its own pipes and getting those replaced.
Well, so I should probably make that clear in the beginning. The city of Chicago is responsible for water that comes, the city of Chicago Department of Water Management is responsible for taking the water out of Lake Michigan and bringing it into your home. So I like to give the example, it's the water that comes out of your faucet versus the water that goes down your drain. And as far as the lead lines, that water is pulled in from Lake Michigan through the underground, water reservoirs. And then when it reaches everyone's individual home, there's a line that takes it from the city to your home. And I think the statistic that Josh just gave is that 90% of those lines that take the water from the city water line to your home are lead lines.
Now, you said that the MWRD kind of handles the water after it's already been through and you don't have a way of removing the lead. Does MWRD monitor the levels of lead in that which goes through, the water that goes through?
I have never received that question before, so I don't know the answer to that. I
Fair
can say that we monitor COVID in your waste product, in our waste.
Interesting. Okay.
Josh,
Well,
do you know the answer to that, or David?
No, I don't, but I'm fascinated by the COVID piece. That's really
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah. No, I don't know the answer to that. And how is it you monitor for COVID?
So if someone is infected in COVID, it comes out through your waste. So we can theoretically predict where outbreaks are going to be based on wastewater. I mean, we can't pinpoint it, but we can generally say that there seems to be a cluster of COVID near this particular plant, and this plant serves this many areas.
So Josh, I have a question. I'm sorry, Jim, I'm stepping on your lines here, but when I heard you describe the sort of governmental entities that either don't appear to be talking to each other, or I'm just curious, is anybody sitting at the table, these various entities that, are handling the water that comes out of the faucet? Are they talking to you? Because the water only goes a couple of inches to go down the faucet. Seems to me that we should be able to get people around the table and address this, because it's affecting Black and brown communities and has been for decades. And it's certainly others of us that don't necessarily live in Black and brown communities are also affected by this. So I'm just curious, is there talk happening?
Yeah, you raise a great point. I mean, the societal cost is huge, and obviously it's very acute for those communities facing it and taking in that poison. To answer your question, David, I don't know. I suspect the answer is no. I think this state legislative bill aims to, it would direct that these lead lines be replaced, ideally by a date certain, and allocate funding for that. It is also part of, at least in principle, President Biden's infrastructure plan that would require 100% of all lead replacement lines. Here in the city of Chicago, for reasons that have never been entirely clear to me, I've heard different things, but up until 1986, it was actually illegal to not use a lead service line to get the water from into your house. So yeah, I don't know how well the entities are coordinating at this point. I mean, the commissioner could probably speak better to this than I can, but obviously the mandate of the MWRD is different than the Department of Water, et cetera.
And I was just sent a note by one of my staff people who they're very smart that says that MWRD does work with partners such as EPA on helping to get rid of lead out of the contaminated water so that it doesn't make its way back into the river. And I can certainly do some more research on that and give it to your listeners if we need more information.
Sure. This is for informational purposes. The more we can learn, the better. I do actually want to pull it back for just 1 second. There's also been questions about plastics in the water. As people know, we've been seeing more and more the oceans and our fish in more and more and more quantities. Does the district monitor the microplastics that are kind of going through the system, and are they able to filter those out before they go back into the
No, unfortunately,
discharge water, the reclaimed water?
So those microbeads and microplastics are very difficult to filter out. As a matter of fact, I think when I was in Springfield, I voted on that bill to ban some of the microbeads that were used in some cosmetic products, because they were so difficult and they were making their way into our water system. So those are very difficult to remove, whether it's the microbeads or whether it's, plastic bags that we use in grocery stores, which, by the way, the city passed an ordinance that plastic bags could only be used, I guess, in stores of certain sizes. I don't remember what the exact ordinance is or was. And then I guess they put a pause on that ordinance when the pandemic happened. Is that right? But now it doesn't seem like they're going back to the paper bags. It's just all plastic bags. And I've noticed that, and I'm not sure what we can do about that. Has anyone else noticed that?
I haven't noticed that.
Yeah, I've noticed that. The stores were not allowing you to bring in your own bags either. Understandably, initially, I think because of COVID issues, though, I think the science doesn't really bear out that bears much fruit anymore. So you raise a great point, and we probably should urge our alder people to, I don't know how long it's paused for, if there's a sunset period or if it's a matter of.
Yeah, I don't know either, but I did notice that, there was a time when they would have a lot of paper bags, but now they don't even have those as much. They're just going back to the way it was prior to that ordinance being passed.
You raise a good point. If the city is considering, state as well, considering beginning to lift the restrictions, social distancing and so on and so forth around COVID, it seems like we should also revisit some of the things that were suspended that made sense, that maybe we want to reinstate. And that would be one of them, I would think.
I agree with this. I do want to bring us back real quick to the lead pipe issue we were discussing earlier. And again, I'm looking to take questions from the audience. Anyone who has them, put them on our chat. I'd be happy to go ahead and pull those in here. But
so isn't replacing lead lines, isn't that part of CEJA? Is that part of CEJA? Am I mistaken?
There is, Commissioner, yes, there is, I think, a policy provision in CEJA, and I'm getting a couple of things combined in my head, so I don't recall exactly what it is, if it's a mandate or just a goal. I believe it's a goal, which is why I think there's been this separate bill introduced that specifically mandates and funds the replacement of all lead lines in Illinois.
Okay.
Because it does seem like a rather large undertaking to replace all of these lead lines that are huge. So the question is, what can we do now? Is passing CEJA the best option? Should municipalities? I mean, we've talked a lot about how municipalities are the ones that do the water providing, and MWRD reclaims it. Do we have to do it, city by city? Do we need to do it statewide? What's the best approach for dealing with this?
I would say, Jim, in all of the above. I mean, I think you start with your council person. If you're in Chicago, your alder person, and you advocate that because there have been different ordinances floated in the past that have really gained traction. I mean, it is an expensive undertaking, and it's something that there would probably need to be state or federal funds for. Again, at the state level, there is this Lead Line Service and Replacement Act that's there. So it would be, again, contacting your house state. And this is a newer, I believe it's newer. And I can tell you, I wrote it down somewhere for anybody taking note, or since this is being recorded. In the Senate, it's SB 1168. In the House, it's HB 3739. Call your representative and your senator and Governor Pritzker and tell them that, that as a constituent that you really demand that this happen, because it's a moral issue. It's all those things. It's really can't be tolerated. And then also, it is a key part of, at least in principle, and we'll see when it comes to the actual text, of various bills being floated at the federal level, and it is part of President Biden's infrastructure plan. I mean, he's talked about he said it at the joint session address that he gave to the joint session of Congress, that he wants 100% replacement. I forget if he identified a number specific to it. In fact, recently it was one of the small but yet slightly hopeful acts of bipartisanship the Senate passed in an overwhelming bipartisan way, a bill that allocated $300 million, I believe it was, to lead line replacement, of which Senator Ossoff from Georgia also passed an amendment as part of that that would allocate, I think, some $30 to $35 million for addressing lead lines in schools. That is a lot of money. I mean, for the whole country, it's not nearly sufficient. And the House is expected to pass that too. But yeah, sorry for the long-winded answer, but really it would be, we really have to put the pressure on all levels of government. And it can't be accepted that we have, for the state of Illinois to have, to talk the talk about social justice and equity, you can't have us have 1/8 of the lead pipelines in 94% Black and Latino communities, and at the same time say Black Lives Matter. The two cannot be reconciled. So we've got to force these people to take action.
I just want to real quickly, if you could repeat for us, we have HB 3739.
HB 3739, and in the Senate, it's SB 1168. And before, I guess I could have mentioned also for CEJA, though that's a little bit, and I guess if people ask, well, okay, so I call and what do I say? I think what you say is this bill is, we understand this bill is out here to replace lead service lines throughout the entire state. And as one of your constituents, I want to urge you to be a co-sponsor of this bill and to urge its passing. Right now, I don't believe it has that many co-sponsors. It's a newer bill. And if they already are a co-sponsor, they'll tell you great. One misperception is, that if your representative is already sponsoring something or you think is already in support of it, that they don't need to hear from you. They need to know there's a groundswell of support. I'm sure the commissioner can speak to it, or I know she can speak to it much better than I can. But if you hear from your constituents, even if you're a co-sponsor of something, I appreciate you co-sponsoring this, and I really hope you make it a legislative priority. I think that gives you the wind in your sails to really advocate the issue to your colleagues and try to move the issue forward.
Absolutely, yes. We represent our constituents. We listen to, or when I was a state rep, legislators listen to the voicemails, emails, and text messages, emails that they get about specific bills. And if the majority of their constituents are telling them to take a certain action, more than likely they will.
Now, in terms of replacing those lines, let's assume for a second the money's there, everything's set, all we need to do is go ahead and replace them. And I guess I'll put this to everyone, but I think Mr. Robinson, I'm looking mostly to you right now. What would you replace them with, and who would be doing that? Would organizations like Manufacturing Renaissance have any hand in training the, I would assume, fairly large workforce we'd need to do that job?
So I can't answer specifically what would replace them. There's PVC, there are all these other sort of things that have been out there for a while. But to answer your training question, what we like to do, of course, is study the issue, determine what would be the next best product, who manufactures them, or where could we begin to manufacture them, and get all of the stakeholders at the table so that we can have a strategic approach to it. And it's not simply replacing pipes. We always look for ways that we can turn that kind of need, that public need, into smarter public policy in a broader sense. So our thinking would be to have determine what are the potential replacement possibilities, get the players around the table, including elected officials, experts, Josh, folks that are all over this issue. And I think between all of us, we can come up with a pathway that makes sense. And from our perspective, in terms of career technical training, then begin to establish what that training would look like, because there's a process that goes with that. And so we would welcome developing a series of discussions around how do we really strategically address this issue with all of the players involved, the industry, the environmentalists, government, community. and in that way, I think we can really kind of hash this out in such a way that we have a strategic approach that satisfies our goal, which is to increase manufacturing as a way to drive community building, but also address the environmental concerns, and to Commissioner's point and the community's point, cleaner water. It just, it makes sense. Let's do that.
Now, I'd like to ask, we mentioned CEJA a lot, the Clean Energy Jobs Act, which is a jobs act that has positive environmental impacts as well. In Illinois, we have a Democratic majority in the House and the Senate and the governor. You've been saying to, call your representatives, tell them to back this, tell them to support. What has stopped it from passing already? What's been the impetus for it not passing? And I guess this goes to Josh.
Oh, sure. That is a great question, and not an easy one to answer, because I think it's really a multifaceted answer. So my understanding, which may be incomplete, but is there are a lot of forces. I mean, one, you have a lot, this is a big state, and in the southern part of the state, fossil fuels have provided, in that industry, and coal and gas have provided jobs for those communities for a long time. And so I think there's a fear, and one of the things CEJA does to try to address that, and this is one of the things, those kind of advocating for CEJA have been promoting and trying to educate everybody on, is that, in the past, a plant would close down, and then that tax base is gone. Your schools suffer, the jobs are gone, your healthcare is gone, all those things. So there has to be something to account for that, and you can't just leave people high and dry. And so I think a lot of the legislators, particularly, though not exclusively in the southern part of the state, have been really reluctant to sign up for that. They see it as kind of as politically dangerous. So that's one reason. And there are, I think, concerns, labor and union concerns, and actually the labor has proposed its own energy bill that actually has a lot of great components to it. And it's one of the ones, it's not as strong as I believe as CEJA is, both from a job creation and a environmental standpoint. But it does have some provisions that I think are pretty strong, and that's one of the ones that's being negotiated right now, along with CEJA, along with the Governor Pritzker introduced a couple of weeks ago his Consumers and Climate First plan, which is the only one other than CEJA that puts a date for carbon-free power sector into the legislation. But so I think there are a lot of competing interests. Frankly, the utilities in United and have also had a lot of power. I mean, I think, as unfortunately former Speaker Madigan and the ComEd scandal and all that have shown, that has been an issue. And so right now, ComEd is kind of sidelined because of that. And so there's been there's money and lobbying and issues there as well, and all those things have kind of prevented, arguably, and I'm probably oversimplifying it, but it prevented us from getting across the finish line on this to date.
Okay.
The fossil fuels, and particularly coal, is still very big downstate, to your point earlier.
And therefore has a lot of influence over the legislators?
Well, if that's your district, and that's their source of income, and that's their life, yeah.
Okay.
And again, Jim, that's one of these kind of issues. These are very complicated, kind of tough political issues, and it requires a political will to address the problem, first of all, and then the right people around the table to strategically approach this, both from R&D, science, realpolitik, community development. All those elements have to be in it. And we're pretty smart. We can figure these things out if we put our minds to it. Commissioner, they turn the river the other way. When cholera was killing people in Chicago. We can do these things if we set our minds to it. So I'm just shocked at the numbers, Josh, you provided. That 1/8 of all of the is a 94% of Black and brown communities. That's crazy.
1/8 of all lead service pipes are in this state out of all 50 states. I mean, that's crazy.
That's incredible. That needs to be solved, you know. And the fact that the authorities, the responsible government entities, and perhaps they are sitting around a table. I don't want to misrepresent them, but it doesn't sound like there's a strategic approach to this just yet. So.
Yeah, there's got to be a will, you know, the refocused, I think one thing that's really benefited, and the environmental movement, if you will, has benefited from and learned from, and is learning from, I should say, has learned from past tense, is kind of the equity and equal justice, environmental justice component that has been left. I mean, the faces of many organizations, the leadership of a lot of these organizations over the years have all too often had some, you know, been white and often male, and there's some histories there in some of these organizations that date back. And that's not to say, you know, that I am white and male, but you know, so but you got to have the communities. All communities need to be involved. And so, you know, even to the earlier point of the fossil fuel, where we're not necessarily talking about it from even a you know, race or that kind of standpoint, you know, people don't want to feel like they're being talked to. They want to be part of the conversation, and they need to be part of the conversation so they can be part of the solution. And so those communities need to feel engaged, and not just feel engaged, but be engaged in coming up with the switch to renewable energy. And so, you know, to the commissioner's standpoint, right, their elected officials are going to be reluctant to take what they might view as a politically toxic vote if they don't feel their communities behind that, because, you know, Josh Bajoni in Chicago is telling them they should. That's not going to be enough.
Yeah, just like we were saying earlier, you know, you want when your constituents call to tell you to support a particular bill, you're going to have those same constituents in your district calling you to tell you to be against the bill if it's going to hurt their livelihoods in their community, in their minds. I mean, not that I agree or not that that's right, but people are going to do what they feel is best for them.
Yeah, right.
Self-interest. Yeah.
We did have, we're running a little short on time, but I do have a quick question for the commissioner that may have been a clarification from something we said earlier. Does the reclaimed water from the MWRD, does that go back into Lake Michigan to be
It goes into the river, and the river takes it downstream.
Okay. Is there
and ultimately to the Gulf of Mexico?
Okay, so it's put into the Chicago River, to the Mississippi, down to the Gulf.
Right.
Okay. Does the MWRD have to work with other agencies, I suppose, that are on essentially the receiving end of whatever we put out, you know, to make sure that there isn't a certain amount of chemicals in there, that there isn't a certain amount of whatever is put in there? Do we have an obligation to other agencies, other states in that regard?
I don't know if we have legal obligations, but I know that the water we put back into the river meets all the EPA standards for cleanliness and removal of contaminants.
Okay.
Josh, do you know anything else?
I think you're absolutely right, Commissioner. I think the MWRD cleans it to all those standards. I think the bigger issues are probably all the farm runoff and things like that as they make their way down the Mississippi.
Right. Which there's always legislation around that too.
Yeah.
Well, we are getting a little short on time, so what I'd like to do is make sure that each of three of you get kind of a closing statement, if you will. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes to just kind of say whatever you'd like about this issue and what you'd like people to do about this issue. And Commissioner, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Great. Okay. So what I'll say is climate change is real. And May of 2020 had the most rainfall ever. And the most rainfall before May of 2020 was May of 2019. So these climate storm events are becoming more and more frequent, more and more intense. And so we need to be aware of it and understand that these things we need to do our part to try and mitigate some of these climate change issues. And one of the things I think that individuals can do, which is very easy, which would help MWRD, is when there is one of these huge rainstorms, one of these big rain events, try not to take a long shower, try not to turn on your dishwasher, try not to use your washer or dryer, anything that's going to add more water into the system going down the drains. Because as the rain is coming out of the sky and going into our sewer systems, and then let's say you and all of your neighbors are using your washing machine at the same time, all that water is going into our system. That can very much overload our system, even though we're working very hard to keep the rainwater out of your basements. But if we're adding more and more water into the system, it will more likely call what we call overflow days, in which rainwater might be discharged directly into the river because we don't have enough capacity to capture all the rainwater. So when we have these huge rain events and these huge storms, try to conserve water as best you can. And the other thing I'll say, I'm probably past my 3 minutes, is, and
Nope.
Josh touched on this earlier, and I should have spoken on it a bit more, is when you can, use green infrastructure, which would be something like a rain barrel that you could connect to your downspout in your home to collect rainwater to use to wash your car, wash your driveway, water your plants. Try and investigate a permeable pavement driveway that captures the rainwater so it seeps slowly into the ground instead of rushing into the gutters. Any number of these things can help us as we try and keep rainwater from entering, or I should say untreated rainwater from entering into our freshwater supply.
Great, thank you so much. Josh, we'll go to you next.
Sure. Again, thanks for having me, and it's been an honor being on with David and the commissioner. I appreciate the time. I would second what the commissioner says. I hope we're all on board by now with that climate change is real. And now I guess I am hopeful. Dave and I were talking, I think, before we came online, that now is a hopeful time. I know this is, I personally believe this past year has been very difficult for numerous reasons, but we have a really big opportunity before us, both at the local state and federal level, of creating jobs, of addressing climate change in a meaningful way, serious way, and of doing that in a way that addresses inequities of the past and inequities of the present. And so, what I would like to leave people with is, in addition to, reaching out to your elected officials and getting them to, pass legislation about replacing lead lines and passing, the Clean Energy Jobs Act, is to talk to your friends and neighbors about it. And I think, express that you care about these things, because I think a lot of people do, but don't necessarily know how to convey it and get them to act. And do the things on the local level that the commissioner noted, whether it's, the best recycling should be kind of the last thing before disposal. The best thing is to use less if we can, and to use smarter. To know what your sources are of things that you buy, and are they, a lot of things now are done in an affordable way that are also sourced in a good way, whether you're buying your coffee, are they paying their farmers fairly and growing it in an ecologically safe way, or is it, being done kind of more in a factory system way? I mean, all those little small things start to add up after a while. So it's just being conscious of all the things that we do, and also holding our elected officials accountable, I think.
Great, thank you. And then Dave, go ahead and close us out.
Oh, thank you so much, Jim. Thank you, Commissioner Josh. Been a real pleasure being on the panel with you, and hopefully maybe we can communicate as this stuff starts to really build some momentum legislatively and otherwise. I think we could do a lot of work good work together. So really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
And I'm just going to double down on our philosophy, which is that smart industrial policy, inclusive industrial policy, will include innovative manufacturing and R&D procedures that will address some of the issues that we've raised during this conversation. It will also seek to reinvest in communities that have been ignored or polluted or disinvested over the years. This is a tremendous opportunity in this moment that we're in, this political climate, as Josh has noted. And I just want to mention that our organization has joined a coalition, including the Progressive Democrats of America and a couple of other groups that are literally talking with the White House now to make sure that the language that comes out of it is in real world and addresses real issues with some of the issues that we deal with as organizations on the street, including environmental sustainability, including R&D investment, including getting manufacturing as a larger part of the GDP so we can be more globally competitive, including creating greater wealth opportunities in Black and brown communities. Because if you're worried about putting food on the table, you're not worried about recycling. I learned that the hard way. So it's important that we draw those things together. And one of the avenues that we do try to have these conversations is at our table, the Chicagoland Manufacturing Renaissance Council. So shameless plug here. We have Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, Congressman Danny Davis, several industry players are all going to discuss the Endless Frontiers Act and the infrastructure bill on June 21st. And I'll send this out and I'll let the IVIPO team know that that's a great place for us to really kind of hammer home some of these issues. Because a lot of times they separate environment from, the manufacturing. They're not. They're all woven together. This is all part of the same kind of strategic framework that we've got to build better. Pardon me, President, but that's really important. And we have this window that we've got to take advantage of. So I'm encouraged by this discussion. I really want to thank the IVIPO and the whole team for pulling this thing together. And we have work to do, though, you folks. Let's get busy on these issues. And,
Can I just, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I'm done. Go ahead, Commissioner.
No, I was going to say you brought up a really important point that a lot of people in Black and brown communities don't have the bandwidth to think about the environment, climate change, recycling, because they're just trying to get a job, get food on their table,
Right.
get back and forth to work. So that's why it's important, I think, for people who look like me, people who look like you, talk about these issues with them, because if they see them talking about it from someone who looks like them, they're more likely to listen and think about things that they can do to make a difference.
Absolutely. And you mentioned something that this country has done well over its span of industrial development. And that is when it decides to convince the public to do something, like say get a vaccine or don't litter, the public campaign process, the public service community gets together, ad council, all those guys, and they come up with really clever ways to get people to move in a certain direction. It's time that we move people again toward environmental stewardship, but in an inclusive way, not just, sort of one-offs.
Mhm.
It's all of it together. So
Right.
that would be my
And one thing, Jimmy, that we didn't really touch upon, but I think that's fundamental to all this is the element of democracy. And I think the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and HB1 that is pending at the federal level, if your vote doesn't count and your representatives don't represent you, but can pick who they want to represent, then none of this matters. So I would encourage everybody to reach out to their federal officials to make sure that some of these, in my opinion, rather draconian voting suppression acts that are being passed and 42 that have been proposed in, I think, 39 states across the country have to comply with federal regulation, and that the John Lewis Voting Rights Act would restore, I think, what we've really lost when the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act back in 2013.
well
And
said.
I think that is actually a perfect example of how all of these things are interconnected. Your Voting Rights Act might impact whether or not environmental legislation gets passed or industrial reform legislation gets passed. So I think it's great that we all agree on that. I'd like to bring on real quickly Joseph Michael Carr, the IVI IPO State Chair, real quick, who'd like to share a message with us.
This was fabulous. I want to thank all the panelists for just a wonderful conversation. It touched on so many different tenets of the public sphere. So I want to thank you, Commissioner, Josh, David, and Jimmy, of course, for putting together an excellent panel. This panel is going to be sent to our membership tomorrow. It ran live on Facebook, and you'll be able to share it with whoever you wish to share it with. Last thing, because I know that we're like a minute into closing up for the night, I just want to make sure that all the members renew their membership to IVI IPO. And if you're not a member, please consider joining IVI IPO. We've had these town halls almost every month during the pandemic, and we'll be moving into hopefully a physical space by the end of the year, still having the town halls and the trainings. For all of the panelists, and this is too late for you, Dave, but all the panelists are going to be given honorary IVI IPO membership for the year. So thank you. We wanted to share with you how much we appreciate you. So with that, I am going to say good night. And I wanted to thank everyone that actually came out tonight and participated, even if they were on Facebook. We really had a good time. Great discussion. Take care, everybody. Jimmy.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us. If you liked what you saw today, go ahead and like the video down below and also subscribe to the channel so you can get notified about whenever we put out new videos about new topics that are interesting to the world that you live in. Thank you.